And welcome again to James, Session 2. This is the Study Bible study where we study the Bible with study Bibles. And Revelation 17:14 tells us, "And these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is the Lord of lords, he is the King of kings. And they who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful." This is our study of James, number 2. Now, James 1:14 tells us, "But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, brings forth death." Now, David wrote, "I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth." Psalm 34:1. Praise was the pattern of David's life, yet David faced pressures much greater than most of us will ever see. One of his sons, Adonijah, broke his heart. Another, Absalom, betrayed him. And his oldest son, Amnon, committed adultery. Now, Saul hounded him week after week. Yet this man of God, this man after God's own heart, said, "Rejoice in the Lord, for praise is comely." Psalm 33:1. Now, trials are common to all, and an attitude of praise is all too uncommon. Now, some of the products of the trials in which we face in our Christian lives. Now, why should we rejoice under pressure? What does James say to be happy? Why does James say to be happy in the midst of trials? Because pressure produces what? James says that we are to rejoice with assurance that the trying of our faith worketh patience. Now, faith meets and bears the testing which pressure brings, and the end result is steadfastness. Pressure produces patience. In the book of James, it is often referred to as the epistle of faith in action. I wonder, my friend, what is your faith like? James describes faith as the Christian's most precious possession, that which is to be strengthened and cultivated at any cost. It is the testing of our faith that produces patience. Patience is a virtue that builds steadfastness. It was prescribed by Philo as the queen of virtues. The testing of our faith is that which develops Christian staying power. Now, when James speaks of steadfastness, he speaks of consistent living for Jesus Christ. Now, the pressures and trials which God allows each one of us to experience are intended to make us less sporadic, less intermittent, and more dependable in during our Christian lives. Now, the Apostle Paul has often compared the Christian life to the competition of an athletic arena. The child of God is in the race of life. "I press toward the mark," said Paul, "for the prize is of high calling of Christ Jesus in me through God." Now, Philippians 3:14. To become an accomplished athlete, one must have patience. Patience is patience that is willing to press forward and to bear pain. Patience that will not give up when the game gets rough. Patience that endures. Paul urges the church at Rome to be patient under tribulation. Now, our patience is increased as we experience the trial of life. The testing of your faith worketh patience, says James. And the reason for patience is found in the next verse, "that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing." The word perfect used here can be defined as full grown, but how do we grow? James tells us that the pressures of life are God's instruments to our full maturity. We need patience so that we may be brought to maturity, that we may be brought to full growth as Christians, that we may be complete. Besides patience, pressure produces completeness. Williams translates the verse, "Let your endurance come to its perfect product so that you may be fully developed and perfectly equipped without any defects." Now, I am convinced that there are too many defective Christians around today. Too many of us are incomplete and unable to do God's work. Maybe we're not equipped. Maybe we're not properly trained. Or, James says, it could be just because of impatience. Now the psalmist declared, "Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Let us not rush God or his plan for our growth. As we face the pressures and the problems of life, let us seek not a passive patience, but rather a positive, enthusiastic cooperation with God's purpose for our lives." Now, yes, my friend, pressures produce patience and completeness. Not only is our patience increased, but James also suggests that the pressure produces divine wisdom in the life of the believer. "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God," says James. Wisdom is the great deficiency of man, but unfortunately it often takes a severe problem in our lives before we realize that we need divine wisdom from above. What is that wisdom that James refers? In a single word, it is the matter of guidance. How to act as we pass through the trials of life. It is human and natural to rely upon our own wisdom and ability, but James says that when you find yourself in the middle of a difficulty, when you lack guidance, you should ask of God. When you do not know where you turn, seek God's wisdom. God is the source of all wisdom. But you ask, how does God give us his wisdom? Proverbs 3:6 tells us, "In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thy own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." Yes, my friend, God will show you his will. God does have a plan for your life, and as you seek his wisdom, he will direct your paths. Now, many people today are running here and there looking for the answers to their problems, their ignorance. In their ignorance, they experiment with alcohol and drugs, they dabble in the occult, they look everywhere for wisdom except in the right place. Now Eve, in her desire to be wise, went to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. She sought wisdom from the serpent. "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God," James 1:5. God is the source. When you are discouraged, when you're facing a decision, ask God, ask God, ask God. And the promise is, it shall be given. How does one get from God? How does God give? He gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. He does not throw you back reproach. He does not throw you back dishonor and discord. For he gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. James 1:5. Now the Greek word translated liberally literally means that God gives without conditions, unconditionally. Now without question as to whether we deserve his gift, the psalmist wrote, "Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Now God is generous. The cross is the sign of addition, adding God to one's life. Now I am so glad that God does not give to us his children in the same way we give to one another. God has no ulterior motive. He does not question us or chide us. He has no idea of return. God gives to all, even as the Apostle Paul said, life and breath and of and all things. Acts 17:25. Now he is the very sustainer of the earth and the heavens. God has provision for our every need, and if any of you lack wisdom, says James, let him ask of God. Now, as we find ourselves engulfed with the trials and testing of a life, we can rejoice. We can actually be happy that God is at work in our lives. We can be thankful for the patience and the wisdom which he gives to us. Now, but we must remember that without faith we will receive nothing. There is a condition attached to the offer of James 1:5. The condition is, you must have faith. Now, faith is a necessary ingredient in all of life. We put money in the bank and we have faith that it will be rightly used. We get into our automobile and drive down the highway. We have faith that our brakes will bring us to a stop. We exercise our faith hundreds and hundreds of times a day. The Bible tells us that patience and wisdom are tremendously important, but without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11:6. It is faith that gives us God's power. Now, when we are in despair, we are surrounded by trouble. We need to look up to God for wisdom and hook up to God in faith. We must ask of God, but most importantly, we must ask in faith. James 1:6. Now, faith is the link that binds our nothingness to his almightiness. James says that we are to ask in faith, nothing wavering. He that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven in the wind and tossed, thrown about like a kite with a broken string. Nothing wavering literally means it is easy to have faith without doubting God's word. The true test comes when we are hit by pressure or pain. James says that when you find yourself in the middle of adversity, ask in faith and God will meet your needs. Once while Jesus and his disciples were in a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee, a great storm came upon them. In Matthew 8 we read, his disciples went to Jesus and awoke him, saying, Lord, Lord, save us, we perish. And Jesus arose and said unto them, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? And he arose and he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Matthew 8:25. Now the disciples had looked at Jesus, who was securely sleeping. But when they looked at the treacherous waves, their faith began to waver. They were the man James describes as the double-minded man. They took their eyes off Christ. They took their eyes off Jesus, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Now, my friend, when the storms of life come down upon you, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus and you will not sink in the water. When the trials become more than you can bear, ask in faith. When everyone around you is sinking, look up and hook up. Ask in faith. Jesus alone can sustain you. James says a double-minded mind is unstable in all his ways. But the child of God cannot be facing two ways at once. We either put our trust in God or we put our trust in ourselves. We must be anchored in the rock of salvation or we will flounder upon the rocks of despair. This is James, session 2, and this is the Bible study, where we study the Bible with study Bibles. John 14:27 says, Peace I leave with you, peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. John 16:33, These things I have spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. And Revelation 17:14 tells us, They shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. He will overcome them, for he is Lord of Lords, he is King of Kings, and those that are with him are the called, the chosen, and the faithful. God bless.